Welcome to At the Table Bible Ministries. Thank you for listening and sharing the word with me. I would like to go to the book of Acts, chapter 7, and begin here at verse 16. This is Stephen, and he is defending himself before the Sanhedrin. And Acts chapter 7, verse 6, continuing through 15, it says, "And God spake on this wise, that his seed should sojourn in a strange land, and that they should bring them into bondage, and entreat them evil 400 years. It's talking about the Israelites going into Egypt. Verse 7, "And the nation to whom they shall be in bondage will I judge, said God. And after that shall they come forth and serve me in this place. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision, and so Abraham begat Isaac, and circumcised him the 8th day, and Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat the 12 patriarchs. And the patriarchs, moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him, and delivered him out of all his afflictions." Okay, verse 10, "And delivered him out of all his afflictions, and gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he made him governor over Egypt and all his house. Now there came a dearth over all the land of Egypt and Canaan, and great affliction, and our fathers found no sustenance. But when Jacob heard that there was corn in Egypt, he sent out our fathers first. And at the second time Joseph was made known to his brethren, and Joseph's kindred was made known unto Pharaoh. Then sent Joseph and called his father Jacob to him, and all his kindred, 75 souls. So Jacob went down into Egypt and died, he and our fathers." Joseph and Jesus are what we consider a prophetic parallel. There are many things about the life of Joseph that is a reflection of Jesus when he comes to earth. Prophetic parallels like Ruth and Boaz, a foreshadowing of the bride in Christ. Even Naomi was an example of Israel being restored to her inheritance through the Gentile nation being brought into that same inheritance. So the inheritance being the promise to Abraham that all nations would be blessed by him and his seed would multiply, and the inheritance of the kingdom of heaven through salvation. Example, right now we have President Trump moving the embassy to Jerusalem and declaring Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel. And in the spiritual realm, it's very significant because through President Trump, God is opening the gate of blessing that comes out of Israel towards the nations that bless her. So because our nation blesses Israel, the blessing of Israel comes upon us, because Bible says that he would bless those who bless her and curse them who curse her. Quote from the Reverend Perry Stone. He says that God conceals his revelation and his truth inside the scriptures. And if you look at the background picture for this message, I kind of just did a quick outline of Jacob and his wives, Leah and Rachel, and their children by themselves and by their handmaids. And the purpose of this message is maintaining our vision in our prison. No matter the storm that you're going through, keep your vision. If you're walking in the fire right now, keep your vision. If you're standing in floodwaters, keep your vision. No matter what is coming against you, no matter the attack, no matter the season of your life, maintain your vision, because it is your vision that God places in you as a seed that is birthed in your life. And Rachel, when she was barren, she had no children, she said, "Give me children lest I die." We have to have a vision within us. We have to have a seed. We have to birth something within us. Our vision ultimately leads us to our high calling that God has set before us, the end of the race in which we run. So in the scriptures, Jacob goes to Laban and works 7 years for Rachel. He's deceived, so he works another 7 years. 14 years total he gives in order to have Leah and Rachel as his wife. Laban is his uncle. It was his mother Rebekah's brother. So then Jacob takes his wives and his wives' handmaids, and they all head back to the land of Canaan. And over a period of time, Rachel and Leah and their 2 handmaids, they have a total of 12 sons. So Joseph is the firstborn of Rachel. He is the seed within her that was birthed, the fulfillment of her vision of having children. And Joseph's brothers didn't like him. Not because he was Rachel's son, but because he was the child of promise. He was the favored son of Jacob. He had been given dreams that showed that he would one day rule over his brethren and his house. Joseph was different because the favor was on him by not only his earthly father, but his heavenly father, and that caused envy with his brothers. Genesis chapter 37, verse 5 through 11 says, "And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. People will hate you for your dream and for your word." Verse 9, "And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to you, to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the same." You cannot just share your vision with anyone, not even your own family sometimes. Favor from God will bring the slander from the world. People can't understand fully the call that God has placed on your life because they can't see the future, but they do see your own past. And this is just Joseph. Nothing really special about him is what his brothers are thinking. Okay, this is just Joseph. Not better than me. Okay, and when God calls you and he places a dream and a vision within your heart, other people have a tendency to look at you and say, well, that's just Christy. You know, she's not more special than me. This person's not more special than me. Why do they think they're going to do some great thing for God? Okay, sometimes what God has given you, you got to keep it to yourself. You have to nurture it until the appointed time. Joseph revealed his vision to his brethren, and it caused strife and envy. They were not ready to accept it. The response that we hope for is praise, right? When we tell our dreams, we're not expecting rejection. Don't ever shut down or envy someone else's vision or calling. Be supportive, even if you can't understand it and you kind of raise your eyebrows internally. Just leave it. It's between them and God. And it says that his brothers envied him, whether they believed the visions or not. They knew he had been touched by the hand of God to interpret the dream. And Joseph had the blessing of the fathers. And one of the hardest things in life is finding out the people closest to you, the ones that you love, aren't in the place where they believe in the call that God has on your life. Not only is your journey not the same path as theirs, but you can be rejected and abandoned by those that you thought had your back, so to speak. So Joseph is sent out to his brethren to bring word back to his father to see how they are and to check on the flocks. And when they see Joseph, they want to kill him, but they know that Jacob loves him more than the rest of them. Reuben convinces them to throw him in a pit, and when Reuben is away, the rest of the brothers take him and sell him to the Ishmaelites heading towards Egypt. And this was the idea bred forth by Judah. So Jacob had made Joseph a coat of many colors that had been stripped off by his brothers and returned to Jacob covered in blood to show proof of his death. He was the son who had been clothed in all the promises of God. Others do not need to accept your vision for it to come to pass. No one can take your promise, and no one can take your light. God does not want you to lay your dreams aside, convinced they're not of Him, because you couldn't find someone else who would acknowledge them. God knows your identity. Others don't have to. Later on, when Joseph's brothers come, they don't know who he is. Pharaoh had changed his name. Your brethren, okay, your sisters, your family, your friends, the world doesn't recognize you when you're moving in its own identity. Okay, your brethren will not recognize you when you're moving in the world's identity, but recognition comes at the revelation of God's identity. When God reveals Joseph to his brethren, that's when they realize who he is. Usually, God will give you support somewhere. Jacob, his dad, doubted some, but it also said that he observed the saying. God will also remove those from you who will doubt and attack your vision. It's very hard. You think you're supposed to be a part of their life or them a part of yours, part of the journey together, part of your support, but it turns out sometimes people are a season for you, and God will remove anyone and anything from around you that will prevent or hinder or hold back what He has set in place for you. God removes them from your life. He removes you from theirs. Others, He may just separate you for a time, okay? They're a purpose for a season, but God takes you to a new season. So when the time gets difficult, when you're in the pit or you're in the prison, doubting if what you've been showed was from God, then He strengthens you. Do not doubt in the darkness what God has shown you and placed within you in the light. It's too hard if when you're down, some of the people surrounding you are telling you that that's not what God has for you, honey. Okay. Are you sure that you should do that? So God will surround you by people who haven't a clue about what He has placed in you. Joseph is sold to Potiphar in Egypt. Okay, Genesis chapter 39, verse 2 through 6. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. And he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. Okay, Joseph is not yet in the fulfillment of his vision. He's in a season. He's in God's permissive will, but not God's perfect will. Then Potiphar's wife accuses Joseph of a misdeed, and Joseph is thrown into prison, even though Joseph is innocent. So Joseph goes from being the favored son of the most prestigious and prosperous shepherd to a pit, and then he goes from the pit to being a slave/servant in Potiphar's house, which is one of the most prestigious homes, and then he goes to prison. No matter the different seasons of his life, even though they were a struggle, God blesses him in the struggle and blesses him in the permissive will, and Joseph holds on to his vision. So the whole time he is in the will of God, but the will of God is not always our idea of where we think we should be, because we're not in our high calling yet. We think of where we ultimately want to go, not all the in-between, especially the struggle that gets us there. And there are a few places sometimes that we have to go in our journey before we can get to where God meant us to be. And when God decides that we've been in that place long enough, then He moves us to the next part of our season or the next part of our journey, and we maintain the vision. We hold on to the promise. We have to maintain our vision in our prison. So when God gave Joseph the dream, it was the high calling that he would one day walk in. And he's getting there, but he's not there yet. God is using him in his life's journey, but Joseph knows he needs to be obedient. Keep going and wait for the vision to come to pass. Genesis chapter 39, verse 20. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did, he was doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. This is where I really want to go with the message. Joseph is in prison, yet the Lord is with him and shows him mercy and gives him favor. God doesn't free him from the prison. He keeps him there. And you can still find favor where you're at. It's this prison or containment area that we enter into in our life. Not always the storms of life, not always the financial difficulties or losing your job or grandma's sick or my son broke his arm, life's challenges. It's not always places of sin or disobedience or habits or addictions, but it is a place that God has brought you to in your life where you're faithful, you're doing what he's called you to do, you're pressing forward, but you know it's not the high calling, it's not the fulfillment of your vision yet, it's your current state of being. And you can't free yourself or go into the next part of the journey until God brings the release. And you may be contained for your season, but your job, your responsibility is to be who God called you to be, and then God brings the release and fulfillment in his time. You keep working for the Lord, and God exalts when he chooses to lift you up. I have carried vision since I was a child, and I'm in another part of that journey in my life. The times that come that find us worthy of his kingdom, but I know that the vision is not yet fulfilled. The birthing process has issued forth the vision, but it is still growing. It is still moving. I'm pressing forward. So now in chapter 40 of the book of Genesis, we see that there is a butler and a baker of Pharaoh's household. They offend Pharaoh, and Pharaoh tosses them into the prison. Both of them have dreams, and God gives Joseph in the prison the interpretation for the dream. And so he doesn't just sit idle. Faith without works is dead. He doesn't lay down and cry and wail and give up and stop. He holds on to the vision in his heart. Joseph was faithful in interpreting and answering the call in prison, and he was faithful over a few things, so eventually God would make him a ruler over many. If Joseph wouldn't have trusted and obeyed God and answered the call, then word wouldn't have reached Pharaoh, because it is the butler who eventually tells Pharaoh that there is a man in prison who could interpret Pharaoh's dream. So God uses the obedience of Joseph in his prison to move him forward. And Joseph's obedience in fulfilling part of his vision is interpreting the vision of others, where they're supposed to go and what they should do for God. And Joseph is beginning to move where he's supposed to be. God moves him. 7 years of prosperous growth, and then 7 years of famine. Ultimately, Joseph is used by God to feed not only all of the land suffering from the famine, but to feed God's chosen people. God brings the plenty, and then he brings the famine. He raised Joseph up to save his people, but it also became a foreshadowing of Christ and the grafting in that would happen of the Gentiles. Jesus was also captured and held. Jesus followed his calling throughout all the journey of his life in the different seasons. Prison came right before the fulfillment of his high calling, which was to be on the cross and his resurrection. The fulfillment of Christ's high calling, the Passover lamb, where the blood of his crucifixion and the power of his resurrection took back the keys of the kingdom and subdued the earth and took authority away from Satan. Isaiah 61 says, "In the opening of the prison to them that are bound." Like Joseph's time, the famine was in the world, but the plenty was with God's chosen. The plenty is with the church. The bread is here. The storehouses didn't run and operate by Pharaoh. The storehouses were put into place by God. And Jesus, like Joseph, has the provision. God took the wealth and power of Egypt and gave it to Joseph to provide for his own. The wealth and power is given to the church anytime God so chooses. We proclaim the time of release is coming, the fulfillment of the vision, and in this nation, and our containment holding us in our lives. We obey where we are at, but we do not settle. We press forward. We press towards the mark of the prize of the high calling, which is in Christ Jesus, and we keep on the journey until it's done. God controls the seasons. So whichever season you find yourself in, let the seed that is in you bear fruit. Let his word in you spring out and maintain your vision that he has placed in your life. Don't let anyone come against it or take it away. And God will ultimately lead you to the fulfillment of your high calling. And that's where we want to press towards and where we want to be. I thank you for listening with me today. This is the Reverend Christy.